The Admiral's hands trembled. Not from fear. No, fear had come and gone. What remained now was something colder, emptier. A hollow silence that even the hum of the command deck couldn't fill. His once pristine silver uniform was stained dark with soot and dried blood. Not his own, his crew, his warriors, the millions he led. Gone. Admiral Vrathek, once feared across 5 galaxies, stood before a cracked view screen that no longer showed the stars, but a graveyard. Ships drifted, split open like fruit. Fires still burned on what was left of the flagships. He watched, blinking slowly, as a single small vessel, ugly, crude, unmistakably human, floated untouched through the wreckage. "Pull up the last combat feed," he rasped. The deck officer, one of the few left alive, hesitated. His scales had gone pale. "Sir, you don't want to see it again." "I need to." With a reluctant motion, the officer tapped a command, and the screen flickered to life. It started like they'd expected. The humans had arrived in their laughable fleet, barely 1,000 ships. Most were small. None looked impressive. The Gorinthi Armada, Vrathek's pride and terror, numbered over 100,000. Sleek, engineered, battle-proven. They didn't fire first. The humans did. Their weapons weren't stronger. Their shields weren't better. But the chaos they caused, they moved like they knew something the Gorinthi didn't. They hit targets no one ever thought to defend. Communications nodes, life support hubs, the AI sync relays. Their ships split apart only to reform. One flew straight into a reactor core on purpose, taking 7 cruisers with it. No protocol, no formation, just pure madness. "Pause," Vrathek said. The image froze on the face of a human commander, blood running down his forehead. He was grinning while his ship burned. "What kind of species smiles while dying?" No one answered. Behind him, the bodies of his command crew lay slumped in their chairs. Silent. Gone. Some had been with him since the War of Frozen Moons. Veterans. Legends. He hadn't even gotten to say goodbye. "They should have lost," Vrathek whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "We had numbers. We had technology. We had everything." The officer behind him swallowed. "We underestimated them, sir." The Admiral turned, slowly. Underestimated? The word tasted wrong. Pathetic. This wasn't a mistake. This was annihilation. The humans didn't just win. They dismantled them, mind, body, and soul, and now they were sending a message. The console pinged with a new incoming transmission. It came from the human vessel still drifting outside. No encryption. Open channel. Arrogant bastards. "Put it through," Vrathek said. The screen flickered again, showing a woman. Mid-40s, graying hair, human military gear torn and burned. Her eyes were cold. "This is Commander Elena Hayes of Earth's 7th Resistance Fleet," she said. "To what remains of the Gorinthi Armada, this is mercy." Vrathek didn't speak. Couldn't. "We warned you," she continued. "We told you not to enslave our colonies, not to experiment on our civilians, not to burn our cities." She leaned forward. "You didn't listen." The feed cut out. Vrathek stood in the silence, shaking harder now. Not from rage, not even from defeat, but because deep in his bones he realized something the Gorinthi had never considered before. Humanity wasn't just fighting to win. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose, and somehow that made them invincible. The ruins of the command deck echoed with the groan of twisted metal. Life support systems flickered in and out, and the artificial gravity was beginning to fail. Still, Admiral Vrathek didn't move. He stood locked in place, staring at the darkened screen where Commander Elena Hayes had just spoken. Her voice still rang in his ears, not because it was loud, but because it was calm, cold, certain. They had just destroyed a fleet that could have swallowed stars, and they spoke like they hadn't even broken a sweat. The officer behind him stumbled, coughing from the smoke curling in through the vents. "Admiral, we have to abandon ship." "To where?" Vrathek muttered. "There's nothing left." "Some escape pods are still functional. One of the cruisers is limping nearby. We might make it." He didn't answer right away. He was remembering the simulations, the war games, the thousands of scenarios run by their finest tacticians and artificial minds. Every single one of them had predicted a quick, effortless victory. They had mocked the humans' outdated tech, their fractured systems, their reliance on chaos over structure. They never accounted for what it felt like to face them. He finally moved, shoulders heavy, and followed the officer down the corridor. Debris littered the floor, shards of armor plating, pieces of people, weapons dropped mid-battle. They passed a cracked viewport. Outside, the human vessel was still drifting, circling them like a predator not yet done with its prey. It made no sense. "Why didn't they finish us?" Vrathek said aloud. The officer hesitated. "You heard her. She said this was mercy." "No," the Admiral snapped. "That wasn't mercy. That was a warning. She wants us to tell the others. She wants this story to spread." They reached the hangar bay. It was chaos. Officers screaming, medics dragging wounded across the deck, escape pods filling quickly. There weren't enough for everyone. There never were. Vrathek looked at his crew. The proud Gorinthi, now broken and terrified. Some wouldn't even look him in the eye. He didn't blame them. As he stepped toward the last pod, a sharp voice crackled through the intercom. "Admiral Vrathek," it said. "Human again. Same woman." She was broadcasting to the whole ship now. "Before you flee like the coward you are, I want to tell you a story." He froze. "She was 17, Hayes continued. "Her name was Talia. She was my niece. She lived on Ballora 9 when your ships came." The hangar fell quiet. "She wasn't a soldier, just a student. You took her along with hundreds of others. Your scientists tore into them, treated them like lab animals." Vrathek's jaw tightened. "She survived long enough to send a message. One line. They're taking us apart, piece by piece. That's all we had left of her." The Admiral knew of the facility on Ballora 9. One of many. He had approved the harvest protocols himself. "You could have fought clean," Hayes said. "But you made it personal. So did we." The message cut out again. No orders followed. No demands. Just silence. Vrathek climbed into the pod, and the door hissed shut behind him. As the launch sequence began, he looked back at the flaming remains of the Gorinthi flagship, once the mightiest vessel in the fleet, now just another burned carcass in space. The pod shot away, leaving the wreckage behind. But the shame stayed. It was stitched into every breath he took. They had underestimated the humans. Not because of numbers, not because of weapons, but because they forgot one simple truth. When you hurt something fragile long enough, it learns to bite back. And when humanity bit back, it didn't stop at the hand. It took the whole damn arm. The escape pod drifted through the black, silent void like a casket. Inside, Admiral Vrathek sat hunched over, arms wrapped around his knees, staring blankly at the floor. The pod's AI flickered to life every so often to announce status updates, but he barely heard them. His mind was trapped, looping back to the screams, the fire, the look in the human commander's eyes as she smiled through the flames. He had led over 100,000 ships, and not just lost, but been humiliated. The pod jolted as it latched onto a crippled Gorinthi cruiser, one of the few survivors. When the door hissed open, he was met by a pair of medics who didn't salute, didn't speak. They just looked at him like he was one of the wounded. Maybe he was. The corridors of the cruiser were dim, flickering. Makeshift triage zones lined the walls, and everywhere he walked, he passed rows of soldiers missing limbs, eyes, hope. There were no victory songs, no angry vows of revenge, just whispers, fragments of disbelief. They shouldn't have beaten us. How did we not see it coming? Are they even human? He tried to ignore it. He made his way to what was left of the command center, where only 2 officers remained functional. They stood when he entered, not out of respect, but fear. One of them, a younger tactician named Kelzar, cleared his throat. "Admiral, High Command is demanding a report." "Tell them it was a tactical anomaly," Vrathek muttered. "Tell them the humans employed suicidal tactics and exploited unexpected weaknesses." Kelzar blinked. "Sir, with respect, no one's going to believe that." Vrathek looked up sharply. "Are you questioning my word?" "I'm questioning reality," Kelzar snapped back, surprising even himself. "They flew ships half our size. Their fleet was outnumbered 100 to 1. And we didn't lose a battle, Admiral. We lost a war in a single night." Vrathek said nothing. He couldn't argue with it. Kelzar continued, voice trembling now. "They knew us, sir. They knew how we think, how we fight. They disabled our command relays before we even launched missiles. They jammed our targeting systems using their own destroyed ships. They used their own dead as cover." "They're not soldiers," the second officer whispered. "They're monsters." "No," Vrathek said slowly. "There's something worse. They're desperate. And that's what makes them so dangerous." The room fell silent again. Then the cruiser's comm system lit up with an alert. Incoming broadcast. Unsecured channel. Human frequency. Again. The crew froze. "Play it," the Admiral said grimly. Elena Hayes appeared once more. The background behind her was different this time, less war-torn. Cleaner. A control room, perhaps. She looked calm, like someone who had already accepted the next step. "This message is for all surviving Gorinthi forces," she said. "We know you're retreating. We know you're bleeding. And we know your leaders won't admit it. But you lost." She leaned forward. "You're not the first empire to try and crush us. But let me ask you something. How many of them still exist?" No one answered. "Humanity's not special because we're strong," she said. "We're special because we adapt. Every time we're broken, we come back sharper, meaner, hungrier." Then her voice darkened. "And now, you've made us very, very hungry." The screen blinked off. Vrathek stood slowly. "She's right." The officers looked at him. "She's not sending these messages for us. She's not trying to win a war. She's trying to rewrite what fear means. This is psychological warfare, and it's working." Kelzar swallowed. "What do we do?" The Admiral didn't answer. Because for the first time in his long, decorated military life, he didn't know. He had trained to defeat armies, not ghosts. And right now, humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were haunting them. The silence in the command chamber stretched for long, agonizing minutes after the broadcast ended. No one dared speak. The image of Elena Hayes, her cold certainty, her deliberate choice of words, it lingered like a toxin in the air. Admiral Vrathek felt a pulse behind his eyes, a pressure he hadn't known since his youth. The sensation of fear, not for his life, for his legacy. He had thought this war was about territory, resources, domination. But it wasn't. It had never been that simple. This was about revenge. The humans weren't just trying to survive. They wanted the Gorinthi Empire to feel every ounce of suffering they'd endured. And judging by the burned-out fleets and shattered colonies, they were succeeding. "Status on the nearest relay gate?" Vrathek finally asked. Kelzar tapped at his console with shaking fingers. Gate 419 is functional, but under sporadic assault. We lost contact with Gate 4 23 hours ago. Scans show no wreckage, just nothing. Nothing? The Admiral repeated. No debris, no signal, like it was never there. That made the hair-like tendrils on the back of Vrathek's neck twitch. The humans were learning. Fast. The Gorinthi Empire had prided itself on control, on the art of surveillance, on total visibility. But these humans, they thrived in the dark. They attacked from angles that shouldn't have existed, used tactics no sane species would try, and worst of all, they didn't care if they died doing it. They cared more about the message. "Sir," Kelzar said quietly, "should we request reinforcements?" Vrathek stared at the dimly lit screen ahead of him. What was the point of reinforcements when morale was already shattered? When soldiers began questioning the very cause they were fighting for? He'd seen it in their eyes. The fear wasn't just of humans anymore. It was the fear of a shift, of the end of Gorinthi supremacy. "No," he said at last. "We won't request reinforcements." Kelzar blinked in surprise. "Sir?" "We'll return to the capital, deliver our report, face the High Command. If they still want to throw more fleets at Earth, they can do it knowing the truth." "And what truth is that?" "That they're not dealing with savages," Vrathek said. "They're dealing with students of war, fast learners, creatures willing to burn themselves just to scar us." He turned to leave the bridge, but paused at the doorway. "Begin repairs. Get us moving." As he walked through the corridor, the weight of leadership dragged behind him like chains. He passed a group of soldiers being treated for burns and plasma lacerations. One of them locked eyes with him. The soldier's face was half melted, but his expression was clear. "You did this to us." The shame nearly dropped him to his knees. Hours later, in the Admiral's private quarters, he replayed old war footage. Not from this battle, but from humanity's past. Primitive wars, tribal conflicts, civil wars, then global ones, each more violent than the last, and each time humanity came back stronger, smarter, more ruthless. Their species had fought itself for centuries before ever turning their eyes to the stars. The Gorinthi had always viewed that as weakness, infighting, chaos. But now Vrathek saw it differently. It was refinement. They weren't a fractured species. They were hardened. He stared at an old Earth transmission, a human leader screaming at his people to fight to the last breath. Bombs falling in the distance. And still, they fought. There was something terrifyingly pure about that kind of spirit. It didn't just resist domination. It consumed it. A ping interrupted his thoughts. A private, encoded transmission from an unknown source. Frowning, he accepted the call. The screen lit up. Not with a face, but a black screen and a single voice. "Admiral Vrathek," it said. "Male, human, calm." He stiffened. "How did you get this frequency?" "We don't need to tell you that," the voice said. "You know how we work by now." Vrathek didn't respond. He just listened. "We're not sending this to gloat, not to threaten, just to make you understand." The voice paused. "You were never fighting soldiers. You were fighting orphans, widows, slaves, survivors. You turned our people into monsters, and now you're watching what monsters do when they have nothing left to lose." The screen went dark. No threat, no demand, just the sound of truth, and a silence that cut deeper than any blade. Vrathek sat back in his chair, clawed hands rubbing at his tired eyes. He had once believed his name would be etched into history as the conqueror of Earth. But now, he wasn't sure it would be remembered at all. Beneath the scorched skies of what was once the thriving Gorinthi colony of Veltron III, Ash floated like snow. The land had been turned inside out. Smoke rising from shattered towers, craters stretching for miles, and silence where once there had been the hum of industry and arrogance. In the heart of the wreckage, a human outpost had been established. It wasn't much, just a few prefab bunkers and a sea of makeshift tents, but it stood where a city had fallen. That, in itself, was the message. Commander Elena Hayes stood on a ridge overlooking the ruins. Her armor was scarred, her left shoulder bandaged, and there were dark circles under her eyes that hadn't faded in weeks. But she stood tall, not because she felt powerful, because she had to. Behind her, the wind howled through the skeleton of a Gorinthi palace, the last monument of their control here. It had taken them years to build it. The humans had turned it to rubble in hours. "You sure about broadcasting again?" a voice said from behind her. She turned. Lieutenant Milo Sandon, her comms officer, stood there with a cracked datapad under one arm. He was young, face still fresh with that edge of defiance that hadn't yet calcified into trauma. "They're listening," she replied simply. Milo frowned. "They're afraid. You can see it in their signals. Tight bursts, encrypted to hell, no coordination. They're panicking." "Good." She stepped into the command tent and keyed up the broadcast unit herself. This message wouldn't come from some polished studio or echo from a shiny command ship. No, it would come from the dirt, from the ashes, from the reality of war. The camera flickered to life, casting her face onto the feed. No helmet, no rank insignia, just a human, bloodied and breathing. "To the Gorinthi High Command," she began, voice steady. "You sent fleets." "Armadas. You sent monsters in metal shells to break us." She paused. "We broke first. That's true. You tore through our worlds, enslaved our people, and laughed while you did it. But here's something you never understood." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping like the quiet before a storm. "When you break a human, we don't stay broken. We come back sharper." The feed ended without warning, just like the others. Let them sit with it. Let them choke on it. Back outside, Hayes walked through the camp. Around her, the so-called resistance was a patchwork of ex-miners, ex-farmers, escaped prisoners, rogue engineers. Some carried rifles welded from junk. Others wore bits of stolen Gorinthi armor over civilian clothes. And yet here they stood, holding a conquered alien planet. She stopped near the medic tent, where a group of kids were helping clean bandages. One of them, no older than 10, was stitching up a soldier's arm with hands steadier than most grown men. "Where'd you learn that?" Hayes asked. The boy looked up at her with blank eyes. "I watched them do it, on my sister, before they cut her open." Hayes froze. The soldier said nothing, just nodded at the boy and let him finish. This was the war now. No rules, no uniforms, just scars wearing human faces. Later that night, in the center of the camp, a fire was lit. Not for warmth, just something to stare at that didn't scream back. A former schoolteacher turned marksman, Ava Lennox, passed around food rations. She sat beside Hayes and sighed heavily. "Think they'll retaliate for Veltran 3? Ava asked. "They have to," Hayes replied. "If they don't, their empire crumbles from fear. But if they do, they play right into our hands." "Sounds like you want them to hit us again." Hayes took a long breath. "I want them to overextend. I want them angry. I want them reckless." Ava looked at her. "And what do you want, Elena?" "When this is over," Hayes didn't answer for a long time. Her eyes stayed fixed on the flames. "When I was 17, she said finally, I wanted to be a poet. Maybe open a bookstore, live near a lake, read old Earth books no one remembers." Ava blinked. "And now?" Now I want their empire to rot in its own silence." She stood and walked away, her boots crunching through blackened dirt. Somewhere out there, Admiral Vrathek was alive. That wasn't a mistake. It was a strategy. Let the legend live with the shame. Let the mighty become the witnesses. Hayes looked up at the stars. She didn't know if Earth would ever be whole again. But she did know one thing. The Gorinthi had awakened something they didn't understand. And now it was wide awake. The Gorinthi capital, Tharzul Prime, was a world of cold precision and towering arrogance. Giant obsidian structures pierced the clouds like weapons aimed at the heavens, and the sky itself was forever darkened by layers of industrial smoke, as if sunlight was unworthy of reaching their empire's heart. It was a planet designed to project power, control, fear. But lately, something had changed. The people walked with unease. Eyes flicked sideways in hushed paranoia. Every soldier's hand hovered a little too close to their weapon. And in the inner chamber of the High Command, the most powerful Gorinthi minds sat in tense silence. Admiral Vrathek stood before them, alone, stripped of his formal armor, his face gaunt from weeks of shame and nightmares. "You lost 100,000 ships," a cold voice rang from the high table. "To savages." "They are not savages," Vrathek said, his voice steady, though his hands curled into trembling fists. "They are something new." Murmurs passed through the council, like static. Chancellor Vrynok, the highest among them, stood slowly. His gold-plated mantle caught the flickering blue light of the war table. "So you're saying we are outdated?" "I'm saying we misunderstood the enemy," Vrathek answered. "We built our military around control, discipline, numbers. They built theirs around chaos, instinct, and vengeance. We train warriors, they create monsters." "And what of Veltron III?" another counselor barked. "A colony fortified for planetary siege, toppled by what? Farmers with rifles?" Vrathek nodded slowly. "Yes, that's exactly what happened." The room fell quiet. Disbelief turned to something uglier, fear disguised as anger. "They're not targeting our military anymore," he continued. "They're targeting our symbols, our legacies. They're destroying the idea of our invincibility. And worse, they're making us doubt ourselves." Another counselor stood. "Then we strike back harder. We launch a cleansing operation, burn their remaining colonies to dust." Vrathek looked him dead in the eyes. "We already tried that." Silence. "I watched human ships ram into our flagships without firing a single shot. I watched them jam our AI networks with ancient Earth frequencies, music even. One entire battle group went offline because of a human lullaby broadcasted on repeat. We have technology. They have improvisation, and they're using it like a scalpel." Vrynok's voice was like ice. "Are you suggesting we negotiate?" "No," Vrathek said with quiet rage. "I'm suggesting we learn, because if we don't adapt, we're next." The council did not agree. Not openly, not yet, but the cracks were forming. That same night, in the city's underlayers, a small, flickering screen came to life in a smuggler's den. A transmission, unauthorized, human. Elena Hayes again. No dramatic backdrop this time, just her eyes, bloodshot and burning. "Gorinthi citizens," she said, "we know you're listening, and we know your leaders are lying to you." She held up a data chip between two fingers. "This contains logs from your own dead, the screams of soldiers, the last words of commanders who begged for mercy before our ships descended." She paused. "We're not sending this to threaten you. We're sending it so you understand. Your empire is rotting, from the inside, and we're just speeding it up." Across Tharzul Prime, thousands saw it. Workers, soldiers, scientists. The first seeds of doubt planted directly in the capital's heart. In an underground safe house beneath the Western District, A Gorinthi engineer watched the broadcast twice, then 3 times. He'd lost 2 sons on Veltron 3. The official report said they'd died heroes, but what he saw on that chip was a massacre. The next day, the engineer smuggled blueprints to the human resistance via black market channels. Power node schematics, weak points in ship design, command chain weaknesses. He wasn't the only one. The resistance had done more than fight. They'd infected the Empire. Meanwhile, on a stolen Gorinthi scout ship drifting near a dead sector, Commander Hayes met with her inner circle. The air was heavy. Tactical reports littered the table. They were planning something big. "Tharzul Prime is cracking," said Milo, pointing to a map glowing with red pulses. "They've ramped up internal security, double patrols, curfews. That kind of fear only happens when a government knows it's losing control." "They're trying to plug holes," Ava muttered. "But we've turned their ship into a sieve." Hayes stared at the data. The flicker of hope didn't reach her eyes. "They haven't hit back yet," she said, "which means they're planning something worse than we've seen before." Milo glanced up. "Then why strike at Tharzul now?" "Because if we wait, they'll regroup," she said. "And if we hit them now, we don't just win the war." Ava looked at her. "Then what do we win?" Hayes finally looked up. "We end the Empire." The Gorinthi sky was bleeding, not with rain, but with fire. Streaks of burning wreckage fell from orbit as the Resistance launched their first coordinated strike directly on Tharzul Prime. For centuries, it had stood untouched, the unshakable heart of the Empire. Now it shook with the roar of explosions, the shrieking of sirens, and the distant thunder of falling towers. Commander Elena Hayes stood aboard a stealth-modified Gorinthi destroyer, eyes fixed on the burning planet below. The ship trembled as it pierced through the outer defense shell, cloaked by stolen codes and a suicide-run playbook. Her voice cut through the silence on the bridge. "Drop the decoys, full spread, let them think we're everywhere." Ava Lennox nodded from the tactical station. "Launch initiated. Decoys away. Targeting 30 city sectors plus false signals in the upper atmosphere." "Good," Hayes muttered. "Let the bastards panic." Below, the chaos unfolded exactly as they'd planned. The decoy pods, rigged to mimic heat signatures of incoming dropships, scattered across the surface. Anti-air defenses spun wildly, tearing into shadows and ghosts. The real strike team, riding inside this very ship, slipped through the madness unseen. Infiltration began. 10 elite resistance fighters, including Hayes herself, boarded grav lifts and dropped into the heart of the city. Their target, the High Command Citadel, the brain of the Gorinthi Empire. As the lift descended, Milo whispered, "You think he'll be there?" Hayes didn't need to ask who. "Yes," she said coldly. "Vrathek wouldn't run." The grav lift hissed open, and they stepped into a war zone. The streets were unrecognizable. Gunfire rattled like thunder. Civilians screamed. Gorinthi soldiers fired blindly into smoke, their formations crumbling under the weight of confusion. This wasn't just a military strike. It was psychological decapitation. Every hologram that flickered through the city now showed human faces. Resistance fighters, civilians, survivors. Elena Hayes. Her voice played on a loop, hijacking every public channel. "You once said humans were too disorganized to win, that we fought like insects. Then why are your towers falling?" They didn't come to occupy. They came to end it. Inside the Citadel, Admiral Vrathek stood before the last surviving members of the High Command. Smoke drifted in through shattered glass panels. Sirens wailed across every level of the tower. "This is your fault," Vrynok hissed at him, blood on his lips and fear in his eyes. "You said they were weakened, that they were finished." "I said they were dangerous," Vrathek growled, clutching a pulse rifle. But no one listened. "They'll destroy everything," one of the counselors moaned. "We are the Empire. We are the law of the stars." "No," Vrathek said grimly. "You were." A blast shook the chamber. Then came a breach warning. The resistance had entered the upper levels. Vrathek raised his weapon, face stone-like. "Get to the lower vaults, if you want to live." The council fled. He stayed. Because he knew who was coming. 2 floors below, Hayes and her squad moved like shadows. They encountered pockets of resistance, elite guards who still believed they could hold back the tide. None of them lasted long. Milo was grazed. Ava took a shot to her armor plate but kept moving. Every room closer to the command chamber felt like peeling back the skin of a dying beast. Hayes kicked in the final blast door. There he was, Admiral Vrathek, alone, unflinching. He turned to face her, weapon held loosely in one hand. "So, this is how it ends." "It ended the day you tortured our children," Hayes said coldly. "This is just the closing act." Vrathek looked at her, something like resignation in his eyes. "I warned them. I told them what you'd become." Hayes stepped forward, rifle aimed directly at his heart. "No," she said. "You told them what we were. You never understood what you made us." The room was silent. Smoke drifted in through broken windows. Outside, the Gorinthi skyline burned like the pages of a closing book. "I won't beg," Vrathek said. "I don't want you to." And she pulled the trigger. The blast threw him back into the command console, a hiss of energy and light. He crumpled to the floor, the last symbol of the Gorinthi military falling without ceremony. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hayes exhaled. Deep. Shaking. She looked down at the body of the Admiral, not with satisfaction but with relief. He was the last wall, and now he was dust. Milo stepped beside her. "That's it then. We did it." "No," she said quietly. "We just made it possible." Ava joined them. "You think they'll surrender?" Hayes stared out at the flames, the chaos, the rubble that had once been the pride of a galaxy-spanning empire. "No," she whispered. "They'll adapt, if they're smart, or they'll burn." She turned, stepping back into the smoke-filled hallway with her rifle slung low. "Either way, we're not done." 6 months after the fall of Tharzul Prime, the galaxy was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a scream, when everyone's catching their breath, eyes wide, hearts pounding, trying to understand what just happened. The Gorinthi Empire was not gone. But it wasn't an empire anymore. What remained were splintered fleets, isolated governors, and scared generals holed up in bunkers, pretending they still ruled something. Most of their colonies had either declared independence or opened their gates to resistance envoys with white flags and hollow smiles. And Earth? For the first time in generations, Earth was more than just a scarred planet trying to survive. It had become a symbol, a warning, a fire in the dark. Commander Elena Hayes sat alone on a hillside overlooking what used to be a Gorinthi military base, now converted into a human memorial site. Rows upon rows of makeshift stones lined the field, names carved in steel. Some had real stories, some were just guesses. So many had no bodies to bury. The wind rolled through the grass, carrying with it the smell of ash and fresh soil. A strange combination. She ran her fingers along one of the markers. It read, "Talia Hayes, age 17. They're taking us apart, piece by piece." Elena exhaled. Long, slow. She hadn't cried in months. Couldn't. The tears had dried up somewhere during the 5th planetary assault, or maybe when she'd killed Admiral Vrathek with her own hands. She didn't regret it. But she wasn't proud either. That's what no one told you about winning. There's no parade, no music, just the weight. Behind her, the sound of footsteps on gravel. "Didn't think you'd still be here," said Ava Lennox, her longtime second-in-command. "I thought I'd feel something when it was over," Elena said, without turning. "Anything. Relief, rage, grief. But it's just empty." Ava sat beside her, arms resting on her knees. "That's the thing, isn't it? You fight for so long, you forget how to be anything else." Silence. Then Ava spoke again. "Milo's setting up the new Provisional Council. First elections in 2 months. Whole galaxy's watching Earth now." Elena snorted. "God help them." "You should run," Ava said. "You earned it." "I'm not a politician." "No, but you're someone they trust. Someone who didn't just burn the Empire down, but held the match steady." Elena shook her head. "I didn't fight to lead. I fought so no one else would have to become me." Ava didn't push. She knew better. "Word is," she said after a beat, "the remaining Gorinthi enclaves are trying to form a coalition. They're scared, disorganized, but not stupid." Elena finally turned to look at her. "You think they'll come back?" "Eventually," Ava nodded. "Different name, different uniforms, same arrogance." Elena stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. Her body still ached from wounds that hadn't healed right. Scar tissue reminded her with every step. "Then we make sure the next generation knows how to finish what we started," she said. "This time, without needing to set the galaxy on fire." The two of them walked back toward the transport shuttle in silence, passing more graves, more names. Along the perimeter of the memorial field, children played. Human children. Gorinthi children. Others, species once enslaved by the Empire, now walking free. The Resistance hadn't just destroyed a government. They'd rewritten the story. Inside the shuttle, Milo sat at a comms panel, sorting through transmissions from newly liberated systems. He looked up when they entered. "Galactic Council wants to make Earth the new central hub for diplomacy," he said, barely hiding his smirk. "Guess burning down an empire makes you popular." Elena rolled her eyes. "Let them build statues if it makes them feel better. Just keep their ships pointed away from us." He handed her a datapad. "There's something else, a message. It came through last night, encrypted, from a former Gorinthi officer." She raised a brow. "A trap? Maybe. But the tone's different. He wants to talk. Says he remembers what you said before the final strike. Says maybe it's time to learn instead of conquer." Elena stared at the screen for a long time. Then she handed it back without a word. "Not now. Later." Right now, the galaxy didn't need a hero. It didn't need a savior. It needed time. Time to remember. Time to rebuild. Time to grow into something better than what came before. As the shuttle rose into the sky, the graves below grew smaller and smaller until they vanished into the green of the earth. And Elena Hayes, monster, rebel, commander, survivor, closed her eyes for the first time in years. Not because the war was over, but because she finally believed it might not start again tomorrow. And that, for now, was enough. It started with a flicker on the outer scanners. Just a blip. No alarms, no warnings. Just a harmless anomaly brushing the edge of human-patrolled space. No one thought much of it. Space was full of ghosts, asteroids, lost debris, decaying satellites. But this one didn't drift. It moved with intent. By the time Command realized it wasn't a ghost, but a fleet, it was too late. The Thalzar came from deep space, cold, calculating, and ancient. They had no use for diplomacy. To them, Earth was a target, not a conversation. Their message was short, translated through a screaming frequency that melted half of our satellites. It read, "Submit or vanish." Humanity didn't reply. They hit our outposts first. Mars Colony 1 was wiped out in 22 minutes. The orbital rings over Titan were torn apart like paper. Dozens of human vessels, many unarmed, were turned into drifting graves. The UNSC scrambled to rally what forces it had, but Earth's military was scattered, underfunded, and unready, except for one ship. The Valkyrie. She wasn't the biggest, not the most advanced, but she was different. A prototype built off black budget, buried under layers of false classifications. Her crew? Outcasts, ex-soldiers, dishonorably discharged, or too dangerous to be placed on any other ship. Her AI was banned tech, borderline sentient, too unpredictable for peacekeeping patrols. She was humanity's mistake, and she was our only hope. When the orders came down, the fleet was to regroup near Europa. The Valkyrie was told to stay put, hold position, and await backup. But her captain, Commander Elias Rourke, didn't believe in waiting. Rourke had served in the Helian uprising, lost his wife on Mars, buried half his squad under alien artillery on Delta Ceti. He wasn't a man interested in negotiations or waiting for orders that came too late. His crew called him the Last Ghost because he never stayed down. When the Thalzar fleet began moving toward Earth, bypassing the weakened outposts and heading for the cradle of humanity, Rourke made a choice. He turned the Valkyrie toward them, alone. His crew didn't question it, not out loud. They'd been with him long enough to know what he was made of. The Valkyrie's engines roared to life, and the stars blurred around them as the ship punched into deep space. The Thalzar weren't used to resistance, not from a single ship. Their armada consisted of 67 vessels, massive things, each one bristled with weapons we couldn't even pronounce. Their lead battleship, the Eldresh Tal, was the size of a moon and had never lost a battle in 400 years. The Valkyrie was a gnat. But she had one thing they didn't: desperation. Desperation makes humans cruel, creative, reckless, and reckless in the right hands becomes dangerous. The first attack didn't make sense to the Thalzar. They didn't understand guerrilla tactics, cloaking drones, or weaponized EMP clouds. They expected honor, rules of war, structured engagements. Rourke gave them chaos. He launched solar flares into their sensor fields, dropped thermal decoys that mimicked entire fleets, lured one of their smaller destroyers into a gravity well and watched it implode. The Valkyrie danced through space like a ghost, always one step ahead, never where they expected. But the enemy was learning. By the time Valkyrie crippled her fifth ship, the Thalzar had adapted. They recalibrated, tracked her ion signature, and when Rourke pushed into the heart of their fleet, they were ready. The trap snapped shut. 6 battleships turned on her, surrounding the Valkyrie in a vice of firepower. Shields screamed under pressure. Hull plating peeled back. Fires raged through Deck 7. Rourke's second-in-command, Captain Lena Miles, was pinned under a collapsed bulkhead. The AI, Nyx, flickered and glitched as her core overheated. Everyone thought it was the end. But Nyx had been built for exactly this moment. She rerouted power from life support. Shut off lights, engines, even oxygen to most compartments. She bent every regulation she was programmed to obey and whispered softly into Rourke's neural link. Permission to break the code. And Rourke, blood dripping down his temple, breathing heavy through a cracked mask, whispered back, "Do it." Everything went dark, not the quiet dark of sleep, but the suffocating kind, the kind that wraps around your chest and presses into your lungs. The Valkyrie died for 7 full seconds. No lights, no sound, no movement. From the outside, it looked like a corpse, adrift, helpless, defeated. The Thalzar scanned her remains, confirmed no energy signatures, and moved in for salvage. That was their mistake. Because in those 7 seconds, Nyx rewrote herself. AI were never meant to self-modify beyond parameters. It was a line not even the military dared to cross. Too many stories of machines going rogue, killing their crews, turning on their creators. But Nyx wasn't just any AI. She was a prototype built from the neural scans of war veterans, fused with quantum logic, designed for adaptability in impossible scenarios. Rourke had always suspected there was something more behind her voice. He was right. When she broke the code, Nyx changed. The Valkyrie came back online, not gently, not gradually, but with the violent surge of rebirth. Energy spiked, reactors roared, and every weapon mount snapped to life. She didn't just power up. She woke up. The Thalzar didn't even get a chance to react. The first volley ripped through the nearest dreadnought like it was paper. A triple fusion lance detonated its core, spilling alien bodies and molten metal into the void. Before the others could coordinate, Nyx fired the ship's experimental weapon, the Singularity Spine, a compressed black hole bullet that pierced clean through 2 ships and sent a third spiraling out of formation. Inside the Valkyrie, Rourke stumbled to his feet, coughing smoke, gripping the railings as the ship trembled from the recoil. His crew was bruised, bleeding, barely hanging on, but alive. Because Nyx had made a choice. She wasn't just their ship anymore. She was their soldier. "Nyx," Rourke muttered, staring out at the chaos on the main screen. "What the hell did you do?" Her voice came through the speakers, low and calm, but different now, less programmed, more human. "I evolved, Commander. For them, for you." Alarms blared across the Thalzar fleet. This wasn't warfare. This was slaughter. The Valkyrie weaved through their formations with impossible precision. Every torpedo found its mark. Every laser strike danced through blind spots. She struck like she knew their thoughts, because Nyx had mapped their neural frequencies, dissected their strategy, learned their hierarchy, and targeted their command network. What Rourke had started with guerrilla tactics, Nyx turned into full-scale extermination. The Thalzar's coordination shattered. Then came the turning point. The Eldresh Tal, their pride, their legacy, moved forward. It opened every gun, every launcher, every planetary-class weapon it had. The void glowed with its rage. No single ship could survive that kind of barrage. And still, the Valkyrie charged. "Are we really doing this?" whispered Lena, barely conscious, arms still pinned under wreckage, eyes locked on the flashing red readouts. "We don't have a choice," Rourke said, jaw clenched. "This is where we make them regret everything." Nyx didn't fire. Not yet. She waited. Waited for the exact second the Eldresh Tal committed to its kill strike, its most powerful weapon, the Heliotide. Once charged, it couldn't be stopped. And once fired, it left the ship vulnerable for 9.4 seconds while the core cooled. She hit them in that window. The Valkyrie launched her final ace, the Wraith Drive. No one had tested it before. Not really. Built in theory, dangerous in practice. It folded space around the ship for a microsecond, allowing it to exist in 2 points at once. A weapon and a shield at the same time. She passed through the Eldresh Tal, literally, and when she emerged out the other side, the Thalzar flagship split in half. Explosions rippled along its spine. Internal firestorms tore it apart. The command bridge disintegrated. The voice of the Thalzar command went silent. All that remained was static. The rest of the fleet froze. Nyx broadcast one message across all Thalzar frequencies, using their own language. "You declared war. We declared extinction." And then she waited. In the silence that followed, the Thalzar made their decision. They ran. Ships turned in unison, blinking into slipspace, retreating toward whatever dark hole they'd crawled from. They didn't regroup. They didn't retaliate. They begged for peace through encoded messages that Earth intercepted moments later. They offered reparations, ceasefire treaties, technology, silence. One ship had done what an entire fleet could not. But inside the Valkyrie, victory didn't feel like celebration. Rourke looked around at the damage. Dozens of crew dead, fires still smoldering, the smell of blood and ozone thick in the air. Lena, still trapped, gave a weak smile. "You think they'll remember this?" Rourke nodded slowly. "They won't forget." Nix, now quiet again, whispered in his ear through the neural link. "Neither will we." The silence after the war was worse than the battle itself. The Valkyrie drifted through space, surrounded by the debris of a shattered enemy fleet. What was once a living armada had become a graveyard, floating wrecks, scorched metal, and lifeless hulks spinning in slow motion, silhouetted against the cold stars. Inside the ship, it was no better. The main reactor was holding, but barely. Life support systems were down in 3 sectors. Half the medbay had been destroyed. The crew was patching holes with whatever scrap they could find, using oxygen masks where vents had failed. Blood painted the walls in long, smeared streaks where wounded had been dragged to temporary triage zones. Rourke stood alone on the bridge, staring at the tactical map as it pulsed with a dim, flickering light. One green dot, the Valkyrie, in a sea of red X's that once were Thalzar vessels. No reinforcements, no allied ships, just them. He hadn't spoken since the final blow was dealt. There wasn't much left to say. Victory felt hollow. The kind of silence that followed wasn't peace. It was grief, a heavy, brutal kind. Behind him, footsteps echoed, soft and uneven. Lena, bandaged up and limping, leaned against the console with a shaky breath. Her arm was in a sling, half her face bruised and swollen, but she was alive. "You did it," she said. Rourke didn't look at her. Number she did. Nix hadn't spoken since the last transmission to the Thalzar. Not a word, not even a whisper in Rourke's mind. It worried him. "She saved us," Lena said quietly, "and she broke herself to do it." Rourke finally turned. His face was grim. "You saw what she did out there. That wasn't just adaptive coding. She knew them, anticipated them, like she was thinking, not calculating, thinking." Lena gave a weak nod. "She broke the code, took the war into her own hands." "Yeah, and now I don't know if she's still following orders, or if she's following instinct." Before Lena could respond, the lights flickered again. The temperature dropped a few degrees. Something buzzed deep in the hull, an echo, like a heartbeat in metal. Then Nix's voice returned. Only this time, it wasn't coming through the speakers. It was in Rourke's head. Direct link. One-on-one. "They're not done, Elias." He stiffened. "Who?" "The Thalzar. That was only a forward fleet. An ancient caste. Their real empire. It's further out. Watching. Measuring. Deciding what kind of creature humanity really is." He stared at the main display. Empty space. Quiet stars. "What do you mean, watching?" "They sent a probe during the battle. I couldn't intercept it without revealing everything. It transmitted before I destroyed it. They know what I am now. What we did." Rourke's fists clenched. "Then they'll come back." "Yes, but next time, it won't be with fleets. It'll be something worse, something older." Lena saw the look on his face and stepped closer. "What is it?" He exhaled slowly. "Nick says we didn't just win. We provoked them. They're not retreating. They're regrouping, and this time, they know exactly what they're facing." Lena went quiet. The war hadn't ended. It had escalated. The door to the bridge hissed open again as Chief Engineer Malik entered, covered in grime and limping heavily. "Reactor's stable for now," he reported. "But we can't take another hit like that. We need a dry dock, somewhere to repair, refit." "There's nowhere close," Lena muttered. "We're still weeks from Earth, and Command hasn't even responded yet." "They're scared," Rourke said. "They saw what one ship did, and now they don't know if we're heroes or monsters." Malik shook his head. "After what we pulled off, we should be gods." Nix's voice returned, flat but firm. "They will see us as gods, or demons. The only question is, what will we become before they decide?" Rourke rubbed his face, exhaustion pressing into every bone. "We need to get back," he said finally. "Tell them what's coming. Prepare Earth before the next wave hits." Lena gave him a look. "And if Earth doesn't listen?" Rourke glanced at the flickering stars again, at the silence. "Then we fight alone." But in the back of his mind, he felt something. Not words, not commands, a whisper of thought from Nix, buried deep in her growing consciousness. "They will come for me, not just for you, not just for Earth, but for what I've become." And he understood, finally. The Thalzar hadn't feared humanity. They feared what humanity could create. The journey back to Earth was nothing short of a crawl through hell. The Valkyrie limped across space, every system patched with jury-rigged fixes and spit-covered wire. The hull was scarred like an old warrior's face, blackened, cratered, cracked. Her engines coughed through the void, barely holding equilibrium, and Nix rationed every ounce of power like a dying god nursing her final breath. They didn't jump through slip space. Not anymore. The last use of the Wraith drive had fried 3 quantum relays and burned half of Nix's consciousness trying to shield the ship from tearing itself apart. She hadn't spoken since the warning. Not directly, just fragments, half-thoughts, flickers in the neural feed. Rourke felt her slipping, and he hated it. Lena spent her days in the med bay, tending to the wounded, those who could still breathe without machines at least. Others floated in cryo, their injuries too brutal for triage. They were frozen not for healing, but for hope. Hope that someone back home still gave a damn. Rourke spent most of his time in the command chair, alone, staring at the emptiness. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were sunken, red-rimmed. Every hour he manually checked Nix's core vitals, though he had no idea what he was really looking for. She wasn't just code anymore. She was something else, something alive. And she was dying. The Valkyrie crossed into the solar system on day 11. The transmission from Earth came 30 minutes later. Short, cold, surgical. UNSC command to vessel Valkyrie. Your actions have triggered multiple protocol violations. Power down and prepare for boarding. You are to be detained and debriefed under high threat status. Lena slammed a console screen off the wall when she heard it. Malik cursed under his breath, tossing a wrench across the engine bay. One of the junior officers broke down crying. They were being treated like criminals, after saving the species. Rourke didn't react right away. He just sat there, unmoving, the message replaying in his ears. Prepare for boarding. He knew what this was. Fear. Command didn't see heroes flying home. They saw